host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us today, and we certainly hope you are sharing this station and this radio show with your friends. Today is February 21st, 2017, and we have our guest today is actually becoming a friend of our show. I'm very happy that he's returned. It's Chuck Johnson from Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. Thank you, Chuck, for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Lonnie.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Why don't we dig in? The hour seems to go quick when we have a lot to talk about. I know you've been working and actively talking about closing the Columbia Generating Station. That's what you work on. That's your career, frankly, and thank you for that. But why don't you tell us about what's been going on with that?
Well, we've been approaching it from a lot of different angles because we first became aware of the fact that we have a GE boiling water reactor very similar in design to the ones that melted down in Fukushima, Japan, sitting next to the Columbia River on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And that got our attention. We realized that this bad design could go wrong again, had that vulnerability of very little time if you lose water or power before you get to meltdown. And so Physicians for Social Responsibility in Oregon and Washington, along with a number of other groups, No Nukes Northwest, to some degree Sierra Club, although their focus has been more on the carbon issue, but they've endorsed our position, Heart of America Northwest, the Alliance for Democracy, and the Oregon Conservancy Foundation have all been working together to try to get this plant shut down. We've determined that there are earthquake dangers at the site, so that could be the trigger point for losing power or water, that it was designed to only withstand half the potential ground motion that could happen at that plant site. And they have until next year, or March of 2018, to explain to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission how they're going to compensate for the fact that their design didn't account for how much ground motion they could have out there. I'm sure the NRC, unfortunately, which is a very permissive regulator, will accept whatever they come up with in terms of explanations or excuses as to why they really don't have to do much to be able to withstand an earthquake. They've been ignoring the NRC has been ignoring the Diablo Canyon earthquake situation for 20 years that they've known about. So I doubt that this will close it. What might close the Columbia Generating Station is just pure old-fashioned economics. We've been talking about this before, and you've had no doubt other guests on your show to talk about the bad economics of nuclear energy these days, right?
Yeah,
Or am
that's
I the
exactly right.
only one?
No, I mean, look, this is the thing. Why don't you go into this article that you, since we have a little bit of time about Robert McCullough, what he did on his article.
Okay. Well, what we did 3 years ago, Robert did an exhaustive study of the economics of the Columbia Generating Station. Initially, when we first contacted him, we just wanted to find out how much it would cost ratepayers to replace it. Assuming that this plant's already built and you can't get rid of the sunk costs, so operating it should probably be cheaper than alternatives. But what he found out is that the economics of nuclear power, with this reactor, and also was becoming clear around the country, we're not keeping up with the low cost of energy. And the source of that has been, to a large degree, fracked natural gas, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it has brought the price of electricity down. And secondarily, but very importantly, wind energy was coming on strong, and in a number of parts of the country, including in our region here in the Pacific Northwest, the price of wind, once a wind generator is built, there's no fuel costs, and the price of wind can drive the cost of power in the Northwest below zero in the middle of the night, which is very disadvantageous for a plant like the Columbia Generating Station that can't turn itself off and on depending upon the availability of other resources. And has very high fixed costs. Running a nuclear plant involves a lot of employees. That's where their major costs are, along with repairs that are needed to try and keep the plant safe. So what he found was that versus the market, we were losing about $200 million a year running this plant for the region's ratepayers. Unfortunately, we thought that this would have a major impact, and that Bonneville and the public power agencies that buy power from Bonneville, which is the agency that markets not just the hydropower in the region, but also the Columbia Generating Station, would say, oh, well, let's phase this thing out, let's shut it down. But no, there's been an awful lot of resistance, mainly because I think public power in the Northwest still has a lot of allegiance to nuclear power, dating back to the time when the Washington Public Power Supply System tried to build 5 reactors and completed the one they're still running, but there's still a lot of loyalty. And because of the 1,000 employees in the Tri-Cities area, especially in that area, there's huge resistance to closing down something that's that big of an employer. So anyway, the other problem we ran into, though, was that McCullough's scenario involved replacing with market power, and that would undoubtedly mean burning probably a considerable amount of natural gas. And we're not excited about that prospect, and other environmental organizations who are less concerned about the nuclear plant were not at all excited about the idea of replacing it with a carbon fuel source, even partially replacing it. So we found when we went to the city of Seattle, whose municipal utility is a co-owner of the nuclear plant, and in conversation with the city council there and with the mayor, came up with a solution that basically says that it's the policy of the city of Seattle to close the Columbia Generating Station nuclear plant as soon as possible and replace it with carbon-free electricity. And coming off the end of that, we went back to our economist, Robert McCullough, and said, okay, what does that look like? How can we make that work, and what would the cost be there? Is it affordable? And he found, because not only has wind come down in price, but solar is really decreasing rapidly. Utility scale solar has become competitive with natural gas in building nuclear. Yeah, and it's which is just shocking. Wouldn't have been true 3 years ago. We have California.
Why is it? Is it because it's easier to make now?
Well, it's a combination of mass production, which has driven down the price. As more and more of these are built, the individual unit price becomes less. And then when you're doing it at a utility scale, you're making a massive buy all at once. You can get a bargain, for the price of each unit.
Yeah.
And then secondly, the other thing that's really revolutionizing, well, the efficiency of each unit has become better, and they now have tracking technology that allows, particularly on these utility solar plants, the solar panel to move with the sun in order to maximize the amount of solar radiation that it absorbs and the power that it produces. And so they're much more efficient than they were, and the price of each individual unit has come down. So, and California has been leading the way in this. The utilities in Southern California have been building solar plants at a very high rate. And in fact, there's been, I don't know if this is true last summer, but the summer before, which was the last time I heard about this, there was at certain points of the summer, as much as 300 megawatts of solar electricity traveling north to the Pacific Northwest from California. So that's a real.
That is the answer. My dentist's office actually has solar panels. Now I live in Eugene, Oregon. Her solar panels on the top of her building, and the owner of that building sells their energy now to eWeb. They have an excess of it, and she's got like a dental office. The building is full of people with all these offices going on, and they use electricity, a lot of it, and they're selling energy to eWeb. Yeah. Now, ironically, she still has to pay her eWeb bill. Isn't that ironic?
Well, that's having a system to feed your localized solar power into is valuable. Having the grid in place.
Very true. Oh, wait till we go a few days without it. So look, right. I this article that you read, it's on we're going to have a link to it inside of this podcast. I sent the link to Jules, but it's by Robert McCullough, Jacob Gelman, and Charles Noble. It's to the McCullough research clients, and it's called Replacing the Columbia Generating Station with Renewable Energy. Now let me just read this last sentence of the abstract. The net present value benefit of replacing CGS with renewable resources is estimated to be between $261.2 million and $530.7 million over the period of March 2017 through June 2026. That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's a 10-year period, so, compared to his previous study, which indicated between 100 and 200 million annually, you're talking about between 250 and 500 million over a 10-year period. So obviously it's more expensive than market prices, but the fact that it's even cheaper than an existing resource is kind of mind-boggling.
Well, the other thing that they're not counting is all the accidents and all the things that we know are going to go wrong at Columbia, and the cost of that, and then the remediation and everything else that goes along with nuclear.
Right. Well,
Chuck, I have a question to ask you.
Okay.
Do you think the resistance by the nuclear industry and by those that are involved in the nuclear industry has anything to do with the idea that this is a failed science experiment? This is an experiment where the United States and the Western, whoever discovered all this stuff, they're way over their head. And I have this intuitive sense that part of why their resistance is because then they're feeling like, we talked about before the show, maybe this is a good segue into it, Toshiba, because I said, don't you think we should move every nuclear facility, all of them need to move from generating waste to figuring out, the whole industry needs to switch from building new reactors, creating new waste, to just stopping those gears and pivoting entirely into how to find the solutions to the waste that they have created, the mess, the terrible destruction that they're ensuing on our planet.
Right. No, I think Toshiba is really a case in point of sort of the self-deception of the nuclear power industry. You know, they put out their propaganda, but unfortunately they drink their own Kool-Aid, and it causes them to do things that are self-destructive.
Well,
Toshiba,
isn't that,
yeah, go
it's
ahead.
not just them, isn't it just all, like even the Bonneville Power Station, that's kind of self-destructive for them to keep forcing this extremely dangerous nuclear power plant on this entire region. It is it's insanity in my view. As a citizen who lives up there, as a person who lives in this environment, like it makes me angry that they're even willing to do that. They ought to shut it down. They have enough evidence to know it's dangerous. Period. Now they have
Well,
the evidence to know it's expensive. So
right.
what else do they need?
Well, the politics are bad. That's the problem, and that's, you know, frequently the
Well,
case.
what does that mean? The politics is like the industrial military complex says you will have nuclear energy, so you will have it.
Well, let me lay it out for you. For starters, you have, as I said, public power has this stubborn insistence on, we didn't make a mistake with WPSS, the Washington Public Power Supply System,
Right.
WPPSS, nicknamed WPSS, initially as a joke, and later they had to change their name to Energy Northwest to get rid of that name. But they basically, Energy Northwest and all of the utilities that are still operating the Columbia Generating Station truly believe that the future belongs to nuclear. And they've shifted their focus now from we're going to run out of power, which was their original fear, the reason why they tried to build so many, and they way overestimated how much power we were going to need in the Northwest, to now it's, you know, we've got to deal with climate change, and the only way to do it is to build a lot of nuclear plants, because wind and solar are toys and they don't produce energy at convenient times of the day sometimes. So therefore, you know, somehow we can figure out a way to store, as Arnie Gunderson likes to say, we can store plutonium for 100,000 years. That's not a major problem, but storing solar energy overnight is insoluble, you know, which is kind of a joke. But
I get that, but you know what? That is their mentality. I mean,
right.
They act as if the nuclear waste is not that big a deal. They act as if children having cancer is not that big a deal. This is the thing. All of us are expendable to the nuclear. I was thinking about this. I said this to my friend. We are the first generation of people whose parents knowingly allowed us to be science experiments in the nuclear industry. Nobody shut it down.
Lonnie, this gets into another aspect of the politics of this, which is labor. You know, there's 1,000 workers at this plant. They're unionized. The labor unions in Washington State and really throughout the Northwest support nuclear energy and always have. The FLCIO continues to support nuclear energy.
Yeah, but why? Because they do not understand the danger of nuclear energy. Well, so maybe it's up to us to start pointing to them.
Excuse me, they even do understand it to some extent. The Hanford workers who are unionized are organizing against the U.S. Department of Energy for the exposure of the workers around the tanks who keep getting exposed to toxic chemicals and breathing them in, and then have these company doctors.
Now, are they saying toxic chemicals or radioactive contamination?
It's mostly toxic chemicals that they're breathing in. You know, that's what the aerosol form. They're breathing in toxic gases, and to some degree.
And what about no radioactive contamination?
There's probably radioactive contamination too, but you don't need to get fixated on whether it's radiation or chemical. I mean, the stew inside of those.
The reason that I get concerned about it is because there is a difference. When you get death from toxic contamination, it does not mutate your future children. There's a huge Well, sometimes it can. You were right about that. That's actually true.
Yeah.
And so they all go hand in hand. I mean, I guess it's astounding. But then how are these unions pro-nuclear?
Well, they're like so many industries. If you have employees working in something, and their paychecks are reliant on it. You try to protect your employees, but at the same time, you try to keep the industry going. And some industries are so dirty that it's a giant contradiction, and that's what.
Well, this is what I think. I think the industry is not going to die. It just has to change focus, because the fact is, even to do the remediation and even to figure out the solutions and to go out there, we're going to need people who understand nuclear science. So those workers and those people who are out there working on creating these big catastrophe nuclear power plants and the minimal energy that they provide, we still need them, even if like Columbia Generating Station closes down. Okay, we may not need all the people working in the plants, but if we were to really truly address the issue and the situation, we would outspring, there would be an upwelling of new types of scientific organizations working on remediating the soil, working on figuring out how to stop really, the answers that they tell us 700,000 years, maybe that's true, but maybe there's a way that we can reverse it or figure out a way to decontaminate. We have an urgency, I believe, Chuck, on this planet.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Lonnie, that just the basic decommissioning, which doesn't make the long-lived waste go away or anything else, but just basically taking apart the plant, shipping off the less radioactive parts to low-level radioactive waste dumps, and tearing it down. Those decommissioning jobs would be about a third, according to Robert McCullough's estimate from his first report. You could hire about a third of the workforce to do that. So, his estimates in terms of how you deal with the workforce in closure were that about a third at this point are eligible for retirement. A third could be involved in decommissioning, and then the rest would either be in a retraining program locally or would be helped in finding jobs elsewhere in the nuclear power industry. So that's basically, you don't have all the jobs go away, in other words, in a decommissioning scenario.
Yeah. And this is my reality that I would say to these unions, even if they think that we're going to save their jobs no matter what. That's a ridiculous statement, because you can't save in an industry a job, the jobs in an industry that's destroying the planet. You
shouldn't.
Well, that's completely immoral. This is what we've got, is immorality running rampant in the whole entire United States attitude towards industry.
Well, and in terms of the nuclear question, we've had, unfortunately, politically, bipartisan support for the nuclear power industry. President Obama was a major supporter of nuclear energy, as was President George W. Bush. You have to go back to President Bill Clinton to find a president who was a nuclear skeptic. So we've had since George W. Bush was elected, or selected, I should say, in 2000. We've had 16 years of pro-nuclear federal government, and subsidies for the exploration of new reactors, and also some subsidies for building some of these new designs. And this is where Toshiba, this is the mind-boggling thing about Toshiba. Here they were getting government loan guarantees to build this brand new reactor that was supposed to solve all of the technical dangers and everything else, and they can't get it built right. It's just a total repeat in terms of the economic problems to what they had in the 1980s, when half of the nuclear power plants that were under construction in the United States never got finished. So, Wall Street didn't forget that. The rest of the general public doesn't remember all this stuff. But there's a reason why Wall Street has been very careful about investing in nuclear energy. It's not because they're moral and, care about the earth. It's because they don't want to lose their shirts.
That's true, Chuck. That's true. Everything about a nuclear power plant is over budget. Everything, all the time. That's their motto, over budget.
Well, there's a great article that I should have linked you to, but I found it after we got on in Bloomberg News. How Toshiba lost $6 billion. A botched nuclear bet pushed the company to near financial ruin. And the graphic alone is worth looking at. It has two giant cooling towers with piles of cash on fire poking out of the top of them. It was on the 17th. It was posted on the 17th.
Yeah, I see it. I just found it.
Yeah, this is common knowledge in the business world. They were sort of, saying, okay, maybe the new nuclear renaissance might work. We'll kind of watch this carefully. Well, it isn't working in the Western world. Where new nuclear is working currently economically is in the controlled economies of China, India, and South Korea.
Yeah, but they're having horrible accidents that they're not talking about either.
Well, this is where the danger is that when you have, particularly in China, where they are building nuclear plants at a very fast rate, you worry about the construction standards.
They're very bad. They had a horrible collapse. A lot of people died.
Well, they had during the earthquake standards they were supposedly meeting obviously weren't being met in standard construction. So one wonders, with all the corruption, whether or not these plants are being built well. And they're building a lot of them. They're building around 20 of them right now.
We already know that.
But this is the only boom, economy for nuclear in the world. There's a sort of a small growth in South Korea, small growth in India, and South Korea is building some right now in the United Arab Emirates. The Russians have big ambitions, but because their cash flow problems, they have been very slow in building nuclear energy. But they also, as we know with Chernobyl, have some quality control problems with their reactors as well. So it's a disturbing situation worldwide.
Yeah.
To some degree, you can be thankful for capitalism in the West because it's dampened the growth of nuclear energy.
That's true. That's the truth. That's why they've gone to the communist countries. I mean, that's for real. Hey, so let me ask you this, because there was this article, Closing Richland. The title is Closing Richland Nuclear Power Plant Would Be a Win for Ratepayers, Study Says. Okay, this came out in the Oregonian. That's where I read it. We were talking about it beforehand. This will also, hopefully, be linked also. But I want to ask you about this. It references this article that we were just talking about that Robert McCullough wrote. But this is how I'd like you to address how the double talk of the nuclear power plant talks about this. This is Mike Paoli, the spokesman for Energy Northwest. He says, it has regarding Columbia Generating Station, it has never run better. The report faults CGS for what it makes so valuable. We make electricity around the clock. With wind and solar, a lot of generation happens at off-peak times. When peak demand comes, you have to baseload generation to cover that. Baseload generation refers to a consistent source of power to meet minimum power requirements. Explain that double talk. He's implying that we can make all this energy, but we won't have it when we need it because it only happens when there's electricity and when there's wind and a lot of sun. Would you explain?
Well, sure. There's truth in that, but it's only half of the equation. The ideal energy source would be one that operates when you need it and doesn't operate when you don't need it. So nuclear power also has problems because it operates when you don't need it. It's running full tilt in the middle of the night when people basically are asleep and they've turned their heat down,
Right.
And their lights off and their computers off and everything else. The Columbia Generating Station is putting out the same amount of power it's putting out in the middle of the day. So it's that creates a problem. If you couple that with variable resources like wind and solar, then you really have a problem, because ideally what you marry with these variable resources are things that you can turn down and turn up. Hydroelectric dams, some of them have to be run more continuously, but an awful lot of them can store water behind the dam and only use it when the power is actually needed. And that matches well with peaks and valleys of wind and solar. Another one is natural gas. If it wasn't a carbon polluter, it would be ideal, but unfortunately it's a terrible carbon polluter, and also the methane itself in the extraction process and along the way as it escapes is an even worse greenhouse gas in the short run than CO2. But in terms of matching variable resources like solar and wind, it's much better than nuclear. So nuclear power in some places, they've actually been using pumped storage at dams to deal with the fact that they have excess nuclear power. In the South, that's a common practice. So, here in the Northwest, they're talking about, there's a proposal from Klickitat County, PUD on the Columbia River, to create a pumped storage facility, but that would be to store wind power. In other parts of the country, it's been used to store nuclear power. So in a way, they're two sides of the same coin. They're producing energy at times that aren't convenient. They don't mention the other side of the coin, that having excess power at inconvenient times is a problem that nuclear has as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this also.
So the answer is, Lonnie, there are ways of dealing with it. One, I mentioned with the variable power of wind and solar. One I already mentioned was, running hydro facilities in conjunction with them. You're limited somewhat because you need to also run those dams in ways that are helpful to fish. So another way of dealing with it is to contract with large power users to curtail their use when you have a large demand. It's called demand response. And these kinds of contracts are being signed by Bonneville right now in order to deal with wind power, and
what does that mean, though?
Other...
Can you explain what that means?
Demand response?
Yeah.
It means that if you've got, let's say you've got an aluminum smelter, and you sign a contract with Bonneville to basically, on maybe an hour's notice, when Bonneville sees that a peak's coming that'll be hard to reach, like it's really a cold snap and you're having to use a lot of electricity,
yeah.
They can tell that aluminum smelter that they'd like them to turn off their power, and then that reduces the amount of electricity that they need during that time, and they pay that aluminum smelter money to do that. And in many cases, it's cheaper to pay someone to do that than it is to build, gas peaking facilities that you only turn on, a few times a year.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like community cooperation. It's like a cooperation between the community to make sure that the system doesn't overload itself.
Right. The other is, we talked about the pump storage. Let's say you're generating a lot of wind power at night, and or a lot of solar power during the middle of the day when you haven't really reached your peak. You can use some of that to pump water up to the top of a hill, and then release it back down through turbines when the power is actually needed. So it's sort of like a water battery. This can be done at dam sites. The one in Klickitat County would be using a separate closed loop, and it's been certified by environmental groups as not having an environmental impact on the fish. So that's one of the advantages of that. and then a third, of course, the most famous one that everyone talks about is increasing efficiency of batteries. Setting up large utility scale battery fields that would be filled with electricity when the power is cheap and plentiful, and then tapped into when you needed it if you were peaking at a time when you weren't generating as much electricity. So those are ways of getting around the problem of the variability of wind and solar. And in our region, with as much hydropower as we have, we should be able to go 100% carbon free, with some planning and some infrastructure put in place. Another way is that if your grid is wide enough, you can be shipping power from a variable source from one part of the region or even another region when it's not available in your region. For example, in Montana, the wind blows more steadily and at a higher rate, and we don't have as much grid capacity to move that wind over the mountains to where the load centers are in the western slope of Washington and Oregon. But there's a lot of discussion about what needs to be done to make that happen, so that we can have access to
that's
that
just infrastructure building. I mean, that's just
right.
The reality is that's been strangled. That's refusing to let the industry grow by the other competitors. I mean, that's the reality of that one, I think. I mean, and the one thing that really blows me away here, though, and maybe I'm incorrect in this, but there is no discussion about the harm to human health that nuclear poses in any of this. Like they not only do they minimalize it, it's not a consideration.
And they don't want to study it. I mean, I don't know if you've discussed on this program, but the NRC a couple of years ago was lined up to do an exhaustive study of people living around nuclear power plants to see if the same thing would be found here that was found in Germany and in France, that certain types of leukemia and other cancers were elevated among people who lived near nuclear power plants. And they were going to actually with the National Academy of Sciences, they were going to set up a study, and money had been set aside for it, about $7 million. And suddenly at the last minute, it was canceled by U.S. Department of Energy because we, quote, couldn't afford it, end quote. And we already knew.
Oh, I remember that. We did talk about it. Of course. Well, what they can't afford? They can't afford knowing the truth. That's what they can't afford. I mean, to be honest, that's the one thing doing this radio show over the last, I guess I started August of 15, right? And understanding in that short period of time, focusing on this issue, the one thing I've really come to realize is the nuclear waste in this country. I don't know about other countries as much as I do our own, but we haven't even touched the surface. It is everywhere. 15,000 abandoned uranium mines at a minimum. Here in Oregon, right. We have a fuse wrap site, an abandoned uranium site in Lakeview, Oregon, and it is an open pit. You can see it on Google. We have all of our nuclear power plants are way beyond their licensure date. All of them are bad. None of them, and they do have leaks. The lack of reporting, the deception, the lies, look what they're doing to the men and women in Hanford. The dismissal of their illnesses it's beyond comprehension. The lack of regard for human life. That is right. The one thing. Like when we talk about American spirit, we talk about we love humanity. We're a generous people. We have a sense of belonging with each other, and that is what makes the American spirit. And you know what? The nuclear industry has subverted that through their alternative facts for 70 years. And I don't think we ought to be shocked at seeing who's president right now, because this is the culmination of accepting lies year after year after year.
I agree with you on that completely. This is the sad thing when you compromise with the truth, and take the politically expedient way, as so many of our leaders have over the years, you end up with somebody who doesn't, who's as insane as our current president. And you have alternative facts presented as truths.
But we've had that
anyway,
for 70 years with the nuclear industry. That's what they've told us for 70 years, alternative facts. And in fact, we have a whole set of scientists, health physicists, who have been brainwashed. Like, it is very difficult to get a health physicist to understand that nuclear energy is super bad for our planet. The common sense of it is just off the charts. It's a failed industry. It ought to be shut down. We do not need to keep feeding a monster that refuses to grow.
Well, this gets at the whole, Admiral Hyman Rickover, who was the founder of the nuclear navy, in his later years regretted having brought nuclear energy into being. He did it as part of the Cold War, in terms of getting our naval ships to operate, being able to keep submarines underwater for extended periods of time, et cetera, with nuclear reactors. But as it got commercialized, what he saw after 3 Mile Island was that if you compromise in order to make money with nuclear, you can have real huge problems. And that's what's happened. The system has become, between the national security in which it was born to start out with, where the utter secrecy and everything was sacrificed, including human health of the people working in that industry, in order to, just keep this monster moving forward. And then commercialize it so that people's profits are involved in working on something that's extremely inherently dangerous. When they talk about nuclear power being, perfectly safe. No, nuclear power is inherently dangerous. It's one of these engineering puzzles that fascinates engineers. You can see how certain engineers get excited about it, because here's the puzzle for you. You're creating an environment that's toxic and completely, deadly to anything near it, generates a lot of heat, and you can get a lot of electricity out of it. How can we do this in a way that's safe? And you really can't, but it's something that a certain type of engineer gets excited about the puzzle aspects of it and believes that they can do it. So that's that. But he lost his faith. He was the ultimate nuclear engineer, and testified to Congress that he felt that perhaps they had made a mistake by developing this technology, particularly commercializing it.
What year was that, Chuck?
That would have been 1981, I think. It was after the 3 Mile Island accident. He was giving testimony during the Reagan administration at that point. But and the other observation he made was that it took us to this point until the nuclear age dawned for the environment of the universe to become, less radioactive so that life could exist. And basically what we're doing right now is reversing that process.
Right, exactly.
And that's an existential observation. But granted, we're doing it in limited ways. It's not, universe-wide, but we're creating the chaos of radioactive material that is not compatible with life forms. And the more of it we create, the more problems we create for life. Just, it's just inherently true about nuclear energy.
Well, this is the one thing that is really stunning. I mean, I just don't think I can get used to it, is that every serious conversation about accepting the fact that nuclear is a dead industry, because it is it creates death. That's all it does. But the only reason that thesis will be accepted is because it's increasingly expensive. it has nothing to do with the humanitarian aspect of the common sense of like we want to live on a beautiful planet idea. It's all about, oh, well, we're going to lose billions of even Jasco in this article that you were talking about. I don't know if we mentioned it, the Toshiba article, how Toshiba lost $6 billion, and there hopefully there'll be a link also to this one. Jasco, who really stood up against the lies of Fukushima and lost his job over it, he's talking about the billions and billions of dollars. He's like, there's billions and billions of dollars at stake here. This could take down Toshiba, and it certainly means the end of new nuclear construction in the United States. Wouldn't that be awesome? But
It
there's
would be.
no there's no conversation about Toshiba. Like, none of these people are going to ever be held liable, none of the CEOs, for their decisions to harm the human health of millions of people. They're going to go to bed, their kids are going to get cancer, and they're going to not at all feel guilty. It's just incomprehensible to me.
Well, Lonnie, it's this sort of tension between trying to create reactors that are safer, and that was the goal of the Westinghouse AP1000 and the new Areva EDF reactor that they've been unsuccessfully trying to build in France and in Finland and in China, was to have these passively cooled reactors that were less likely to have accidents and so forth. But it's every time you pay attention to safety issues, you add to cost. So it's a conundrum they can't get out of. I mean, it's very important that we emphasize safety, because you can build nuclear reactors cheaply. They probably wouldn't be very safe, you know.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. You can either get it fast, or you can either do it fast, or you can do it well, or you can either do it safer, or you can do it cheap. You know,
you can't have both. Yeah, exactly.
You can't have both, and that's, they're complaining about all of the regulations from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Well, you know, as passive a pussycat as they've been, they're stronger than some other agencies. I really, like I said before, I worry about these reactors they're building in China. There's a reason why Bill Gates is trying to build his new, completely different design reactor in China. It's because he doesn't have to worry about any pesky agencies, getting in his way to.
Right. And if people die, he's not, no big deal. People won't be that outraged. It'll just be like, whatever. I mean, this is the thing. Yeah. Honestly, it's beyond comprehension that these people even, but then again, they don't mind the whole thesis. I mean, imagine we have an industry where we accept the fact that in order to have it, we're going to have additional cancers and childhood diseases. They accept that fact. That's incomprehensible to me when we think about it.
Well, I don't think they do. I think they're.
Oh, yes, they do. For every 2 rads, they accept that on the NRC website. For every 2 rads in the air for a population of 1,032,000, they anticipate 32,000 extra cancers and over 225,000 birth defects. That is a standard.
Lonnie, this is why they didn't want to study around these reactors. They claim because they already knew the answer, and the answer is we're safe. The real reason is that they already know the answer, and the answer is that they're going to find increased cancer, elevated cancer around these reactors, and they don't want that to be known.
Well, for that reason, Chuck, I'm so glad that you're out there working on this every day. Kudos to you for being able to find work doing that, because I think that is awesome. I mean, my hat is off to all the people that work on this on a daily basis and dig in and talk to the politicians and deal with this, because that's not an easy thing, because you have to be able to talk to these people in a certain way for them to even be willing to talk to you once they know that you don't believe in what they want to do.
Well, it is a challenge, because with an industry that's as well entrenched as nuclear, and that has the the help of organized labor, which really influences Democratic politicians, it really is a huge challenge to figure out how to approach it. The other problem, of course, is that we've got this looming horrible, catastrophic problem of climate change, and nuclear power has grasped onto that like a life preserver to say, oh my God, look at this. We produce less carbon than burning fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's a complete lie. That's a complete lie, though. That is a complete lie.
No, it's not.
It is when you look at it from cradle to grave on the use of nuclear power. That is a complete lie.
Well, it's true of anything, though, Lonnie. I mean, it takes fossil fuels to produce solar and wind as well. Now, possibly less than nuclear, but nuclear, even when you add in all of that, it's going to be you'll release less carbon and less methane into the environment.
But you're releasing a toxin that is beyond. So this is the difference. Yes, it's releasing less carbon, but it's producing a toxin that is as harmful, if not worse, than the carbon. So it's
different. They're both.
You want to die of hemlock, or you want to die of arsenic? That's really the difference.
People ask me, which, if I had to choose between the two, which would I choose, nuclear or carbon fuels? And I say, I don't think that's a valid choice. It's like asking somebody, would you rather be shot in the head or in the stomach?
Exactly.
No, I'd rather not be shot. Sorry. Thank you very much. Let's produce electricity in ways that don't shoot ourselves, in the foot at best, but in vital organs at worst. Surely we're smart enough to do that, and we are. We actually have the solution staring us in the face.
That's right. And
the other solution, Lonnie, that we don't talk about, this is something that my friend Mark Rabinowitz brings up all the time. He's constantly harassing me about this, is that as long as we don't address the fact that human population continues to grow, human use of resources continues to grow, even if we do everything as green as possible, there are limits to how much material we can utilize from the earth in solar and wind panels, how much we can store in batteries, how much electricity we can generate with dams we've already built. We don't necessarily want to build any more. We have to get our overpopulation issue dealt with, and we have to get our consumption problem dealt with as humanity, or we aren't going to solve this. We can figure things out in the short run, but if these other trends continue, we're going to continue to have problems, perhaps it won't be. We'll stop producing as much CO2, and we won't have, we've already set off some climate change problems that are inevitably happening, but we'll just exchange it for different problems. So we're going to have to grapple with our evolutionarily defunct instinct to acquire more and more and more, which was very useful when we were small bands.
Well, I actually disagree with that. I don't think that's instinctual. I think that's kind of a socially engineered. I mean, this whole thing of consumption basis, this is not, humanity did not come up through the last 100,000 years with this concept of more and more and more. I mean, it's almost like a false. That again, I think that whole thing, and frankly, in terms of us having to deal with the population control, we don't have to worry about it, because Fukushima and the nuclear pollution and the chemical pollution that's on this planet is stilting creating a lot of sterility. And this next generations, the next 2 or 3 generations are going to definitely, just like in Japan, they're seeing population drop-offs. I mean, it is going to happen. It's not a matter of, the other part that keeps the population out of control is because of the political issues that, prevent women from getting educated, women from getting birth control, families
Right.
from taking control of their lives. I mean, there is
Yep.
not really, when you actually educate people and give them access to birth control, they take full advantage of all of that, and the population
Right.
goes down. But this
Right.
overpopulation segments is creating these segments of large overpopulated, ill-educated people is intentional to create the slave base, frankly.
Well, I think I don't know whether some of it's intentional, some of it is religiously based, and wrong-headed, in my opinion. But whatever it is, it's continuing to feed a problem, which is this overconsumption of our world's resources, and then turning to things that are toxic, like overburning fossil fuels or operating nuclear energy. So it's part of an overall rethinking that we need to do that we still haven't done. We've known about this really since limits to growth in the 70s, and we've known about all the problems, we've known about all the solutions, but it's unfortunately we've been very slow to make the changes we need to make. But we need to keep trying. Otherwise, the planet will make, as George Carlin famously used to say, we don't need to save the earth. The earth will be fine.
Right.
The earth has survived a lot of different species. It's humanity itself that endangers itself. So
that's actually true. And I think that we are the generation of people, and frankly, the work that you do, this work that I do, and I think we are waking a lot of people up. There's a general consensus of people who are saying, you know what, we are going to pay attention and we are going to actively engage, and we're going to think of ways to change the paradigm and change the conversation with the people who make the decisions, because it is paramount that we immediately pivot from going off the cliff here, because that's
Right.
about what we're doing with this you're right to lump them all together, frankly. The coal, the carbon, and the nuclear, they kind of go together. I don't see them as separate. And ever since I talked to that health physicist in St. Louis, I agree with him completely about the chemical pollution, that he convinced me that chemical pollution is far more immediately dangerous to human health than the nuclear, because we won't survive beyond to the major damage that nuclear is causing.
Yeah, you could be right about that.
I mean, that was a pretty compelling argument he gave me. When I looked it up, I'm like, wow, there is a lot of chemical pollution. You know what, Chuck, we have 1 minute left. This goes so quickly. Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come back.
Definitely. I love it. And you forced me to think outside the box, which I really love. And I hope the listeners enjoy it as well.
Great. Well, why don't you tell people how to reach you?
Okay. You can reach me, send me an email at chuck@oregonpsr.org if you're interested in working with us or want more information. And our website is www.oregonpsr.org. And hope that you'll take a look at these links that Lonnie's put up as well. It should give you food for thought.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chuck. Put your courage feet on, you guys. Lean into it. Democracy only works if you do. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk with you tomorrow. Again, thank you, Chuck, for joining us. Really appreciate the great interview. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lonnie.
On the